Hello and welcome to Temple of Akasha, the home of embodied spirituality, with me, Natasha. So I think today is the day, guys. I think today is the day that I speak about my Kundalini awakening. I've kind of dreaded making this video. I knew at some point I wanted to share my personal experience, but it's still something that I hold a lot of shame around, I think. And it feels very vulnerable for me to talk about it this publicly, but it feels also important to do so because I know that there are many people at this time moving through spontaneous Kundalini awakenings like what I had, and experiencing all sorts of weird and wonderful and wacky symptoms and consequences of this energy stirring. And so it feels like an act of service to share my experience, and I hope that if you have been through an experience like this, or you know someone that has, it will help to validate that a little bit more. Having said all of that, I need to just take a deep breath and grab my tea, because this is it's meaty. This is a meaty story as well. I'm going to try and keep it as concise as I can, but I think I can only really do the story justice by telling you a little bit of context as well as the actual experience itself. So I recommend grabbing a brew and settling down with me so we can explore this subject. So I'm not going to speak about what a Kundalini awakening is in lots of detail here. I'm not going to be speaking about the symptoms, how you can awaken your Kundalini. That's not something that I am actually an advocate of anyway. I don't think we should wake this sleeping giant unless we have a really firm foundation in place first and we know what we're getting ourselves into. So that's not what this video is. This video is going to be my personal experience of experiencing a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, which happened for me in October of 2019. So 3 years ago now, just over 3 years ago. We're in November 2022. And so let's begin our journey in India, South India, where I was when I experienced my awakening in 2019. And I will paint a picture for you. So I had travelled to South India with my ex-partner so that I could complete a 200-hour yoga teacher training course in Goa. And we'd left in August, and we'd been travelling for a little while before my course started in October. And I'm going to just preface right now in saying that earlier that year, I'd been through 9 months of quite intense therapy, which included somatic experiencing, so lots of body work, trauma release. It was very potent therapy for me, very powerful, but I finished my sessions partly because we were traveling, but also partly because I'd recognized that I'd hit a limit with regards to how much I felt safe to express in the space that I was in, because my therapist's office was above a shop and neighbouring 2 other shops. So I intuitively felt that when I was going through the therapeutic process, there needed to be a really audible release that might not look or sound very pretty. And I was super, super aware that I was surrounded by, kind of members of the public and shops and services, and that when I left that office space or that therapeutic space, I'd have to then probably pass all of those people, and it just felt far too vulnerable for me for where I was. And so I kind of left my therapeutic experience that year knowing that I hadn't fully unlocked all that needed to be expressed through me. So that's important, I think. That sets a little bit of context, because I was already kind of deep into really moving through quite deeply rooted developmental trauma. And I should probably also preface by saying that at this point I had been on an awakening journey, you could say, for about 3 years. So I would say that my awakening really acutely kicked off in 2016 when I was living in Vietnam. Arguably, the seeds were planted when I went through my first relationship disillusion in 2013. That process began an explorative journey for me, where I started to self-inquire, and I started to look at my relationship with my ex and the part that I played. So 2013, I started to become curious about my own. I started to self-reflect. 2016, I was exposed to Eckhart Tolle, Qigong, Buddhism in a very kind of powerful and profound way that just shifted things very quickly for me. 2019, Kundalini Awakening happens in October in India. So that's the context. So I was 1 week and 1 day into my yoga teacher training when I had the awakening. I did not know what happened to me at the time that I experienced this. So what had happened was, well, actually, it was kind of marked. The whole yoga teacher training experience was almost marked with, I don't want to say a bad omen, but it didn't start in the best way. The ceremony that we held as a group prior to the course starting, the evening before, I was very, very unwell for that. So I was kind of, the entire time this ceremony was taking place, I was like swaying, I was really nauseous. And then right at the end of the ceremony, I ran to the loo and threw up. And I thought, well, that's not a very positive start to the course, but, you know, maybe I'm just purging in preparation for this experience. But I felt that that was kind of a bit auspicious, given that I didn't actually finish the training in the end. That's the context. I'd finished the first week of my training. And I'll probably make a separate video about yoga teacher trainings, because I have a very different view on all of that now, 3 years later. But I'd finished the first week of this intensive training course. And the night before my Kundalini awakening / God explosion, as I call it, I'd had an incident with one of the other participants on the course that I feel was almost the straw that broke the camel's back, in terms of me having just this epic, otherworldly release. Am I going to explain what happened? Yes, I will, because, it doesn't matter, ultimately. I'm a bit hesitant to talk about it because it sounds awful, but it really wasn't coming from a bad place in my heart, but I can understand why it sounds really bad. So the night before my Kundalini awakening, we'd finished our first week. I think it was Hatha. We'd gone through the Hatha and asana style. And we were then demonstrating to each other in groups of 3. And we were leading each other through the sequence, the Sun Salutation A sequence. So we were moving through, was it classic Sun Salutations? I don't know. We were leading each other through Sun Salutation sequences. And one of the ladies in my group was a German, really lovely German lady who was a doctor or a GP, like middle-aged, really, really, really sweet, really lovely lady. And during this teaching kind of assessment, we had to use the Sanskrit names for each asana as we were moving through the Sun Salutation sequence. And bless her, I shouldn't laugh, because I wasn't laughing at her. It was just this childlike part of me that found it really amusing. Because she hadn't learned the Sanskrit, or she wasn't very familiar with it, she was just making up words. She was just making up words as she was guiding me and this other lady through the Sun Salutation sequence. And I couldn't help but laugh. And it wasn't in a malicious way. It wasn't laughing at her like, you're so stupid. It was just a really childlike, Like, it's funny when someone sounds like they're just speaking absolute gibberish, but they're trying to pass it off as something legit. So, we were in a teaching assessment, we were being watched by teachers, and she was, all the other teachers were walking around the room, and she was just speaking essentially gibberish, telling us to go into each posture. Anyway, I pretty much lost it. Like, I just could not stop laughing, which, of course, being an empath, I felt the shift in the energy immediately, and it was all very uncomfortable, and I feel awful because she felt awful. She felt so self-conscious after that. It changed the dynamic. I apologized profusely. She was on cleaning duties that night, and I was like, please go, let me clean for you. I'm so, so sorry. Tried to explain that it wasn't about her, and then I told a white lie because I felt bad, and I said, oh, it's because you said something and it reminded me of a previous funny experience. But that is important, the reason that I didn't tell the whole truth, because it essentially created like a block in my throat chakra. And it was actually there was like a block between my heart, my thymus, and my throat. So this whole area became really blocked that night, to the point where it was like I felt like I had like a weight in these centers, and it was becoming unbearable. And it didn't matter how much I cried or how much I apologized. This energy was just sat there. And I went to bed feeling awful about the whole situation. And then I woke up the next day, went to my course, and we'd started Ashtanga yoga that week. So we were then starting a new style. And we'd moved through breath of fire, and we'd moved through the full primary 1 series of Ashtanga yoga. And we were just beginning to explore that style when that morning I started to develop fever symptoms out of nowhere. So we'd gone down to breakfast early in the morning, and I could start to feel that I wasn't quite right. I was experiencing a mild headache, some nausea. I found that I couldn't eat very much, so I left most of my breakfast. By the time it got to nearly like approaching lunchtime, like kind of 11 to 12 o'clock, I had broken out into a full-on fever, and I was in the history class, trying to be present and pay attention, but I was shivering. I'd been bundled in blankets. I had like the sweats. I had a spinning head and a migraine. I was just a mess. So eventually the teacher said, like, you probably either need to go to a doctor you need to either go back to your hotel or you need to go to a doctor. It could be dengue fever. But something in me knew it wasn't dengue fever. This part of me knew instinctively that it was related to this block that I was feeling, this sense of congestion, this sense of this stagnation in my energy body. I could feel it, that there was some emotional charge behind what I was experiencing. Just intuitively felt that. So I did get in a taxi, and I asked to go back to my hotel where my partner was at the time. We'd booked out, I think, 5 weeks of accommodation at this particular hotel, fairly close to where the yoga teacher training was being held. And I should also say at this point that we had gone, so it was October in South India, so it was just the beginning of the rainy season, and they hadn't had, or monsoon season, and they hadn't had their, is that right? Was it just the beginning or just the end? I'm pretty sure it was just the beginning of monsoon season. And they hadn't had a monsoon rain while we'd been there, basically. I can't remember if it was the beginning or the end of the season. I'm pretty sure it was the beginning. But they hadn't had a monsoon rain there yet. We hadn't experienced that yet. And we were told by the guy that owns the hotel that it's really loud, and that, it just comes down, and you kind of just have to take shelter when it happens. And when I was in the taxi going back to the hotel, the rain came. The monsoon rain came. And I was at the time thinking, oh no, I'm going to have to walk from the taxi to the hotel feeling the way I feel in the pouring rain. But actually, it was a blessing that the rain came. So I stumbled out of the taxi, saw my boyfriend sitting on the porch, and was like, Tim, something's wrong. Like, I don't feel well. Can you sit in presence with me? And I just lay down on the bed. And he had gone outside, I think just to do like a sweep of the area. And because we were, we were very close and very, we were connected, he knew that I needed to have an emotional release too. And so he came back into the hotel room and he was like, Tash, the rains have come. It's absolutely pouring down. You can have a release now. This is the release that you needed when you're in therapy and you felt like you couldn't have that audible release. He was like, it's time. Like, it's safe. No one can hear you. No one's going to judge you. No one's going to come in. He was like, just go for it. Let it go. And I've got like goosebumps, because at that moment, it was like finally permission to just surrender to everything, to surrender to this random bodily, sense of dis-ease that I was experiencing that manifested as a flu. So the flu, I see now, was basically the universe's way of getting me to lay the fuck down and surrender, because if I hadn't had such an intense flu-like experience, I would not have surrendered to what was about to happen. But my physical body was so weak by this point, and I was like sweating and I was just a mess. I'd stripped naked. I was on the bed. I had a banging headache. I felt so weak. And then the rains came and I just let it go. Like, I let it all go. I was howling. And that was when the process began. Now, I've still not listened to it yet. I actually have audio. My boyfriend at the time recorded what had happened, at least an hour and a half of it. I have the audio on my phone, and I'm half tempted to insert some of it here just so you have an idea of what happened. But I don't know if I'm going to do that, because I still haven't had the guts to listen to it back yet. So, what proceeded to happen over the course of the next 3 or 4 hours was what I call the God explosion, or what I think could be described as the kind of acute Kundalini awakening experience. So I was on the bed, I was, just letting it all go. I was howling, I was crying. And what started to happen was I began to slowly lose autonomy of my body. And what I mean by that is that I got a sense that I was no longer, Natasha, was no longer in charge, so to speak. Now, I know that sounds probably a little bit ominous, but I've had dark experiences before, and this did not feel malevolent in the slightest. It actually was a very profound experience, in that I was completely in witnesser consciousness. As in, I was observing all of this without any judgment. I was just witnessing it all happening to the physical vessel that maybe I have identified as Natasha at one point, right? Or had identified as Natasha at one point. I was just watching the physical vessel being moved. I was watching my arm being guided to move a certain way. I was slowly being turned. because what happened during that experience was I actually then re-experienced trauma from several past lives. Past lives, at least one of them that I had an awareness of, which was actually a past life that I'd gone into regarding my twin flame, a very upsetting and kind of brutal experience with my twin flame in another life. And so I essentially was moved through the death that I experienced in that life again, and I relived that death. And my body was moved in the same way that I was moved in that life when I was being killed. And I was basically seeing it all playing out. And then I was moving through all the emotion that was being experienced in that life, in that incarnation. I can't explain it. It was like I was experiencing immense agony, immense despair, immense sense of betrayal, because in that life my twin had, well, I can explain briefly that my twin and I in that life were brothers, and we were soldiers on a battlefield, and I, from what I can understand or what I've garnered, I was set to inherit either a kingdom, I was a lord of some kind, I was set to inherit something, I was the older brother, and he'd killed me in battle so that he could be the one to inherit rather than me. And during that death, he stabbed me in the back. I mean, it's all absolutely bonkers once you start to know who my twin is. He's a chiropractor. He stabbed me in the back in this acute space where I've had a lot of issues. And then he turned me over so that I could see that it was him that killed me. And that was the moment when I saw that during this experience, that I just fell apart in despair, in this sense of betrayal. And it was crushing. It was just absolutely crushing. And I just, another wave ripped through me, and my body started to move and tremor. And what proceeded to happen after that, I'm not going to go through every single experience that I moved through, because in all honesty, I can't remember every single aspect. But what proceeded to happen over the course of that 3 to 4 hour period was I was moved by the divine through a series of somatic releases, chakra clearing experiences. I started channeling light language, which at the time I had no idea what was happening. So I started to just channel all of these languages. Some sounded, like Hebrew, some sounded Germanic, some didn't sound like they were from this planet at all. I was making weird noises. I, at one point, started involuntarily chanting all of the seed mantras for each chakra, which at the time I didn't consciously know the seed mantras for each chakra. I knew Ham because I'd been doing a lot of work on my throat chakra prior to that experience. That was the chakra I'd been working with. I hadn't done any real focused work on any other chakra. So I knew Ham, but I was channeling the seed mantras from the base of my spine all the way up to my crown. And what was happening was I would channel a mantra, and then it would start to change in octave and pitch, and it would go yam, 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 yam. And what was happening was I could feel energy being moved up and out, and it would literally come out as me like spitting or like hocking up something. My physical body was literally being cleared out. I filled up, I think, 3 bins worth of tissue where I was just clearing mucus and I was clearing stuff out. It was unbelievable. So I moved through all of this kind of chakra attunement process, for want of a better term. What else happened? I started to sing Icarus, so souls, or Icarus, so soul songs, and kind of now that that's happening to me again, I know that it's kind of past life iterations from shamanic incarnations and from my ancestral line and my lineage as a medicine woman. That started to come through, and I would, I'd gone from being moved through like trauma release through these past life deaths, and releasing the trauma from those experiences, to channeling the seed mantras and clearing out my chakras, to then kind of sitting in, swaying and singing all of these Icarus and singing like soul songs. and a whole host of other stuff happened in between that. My body was just, I was just being guided the entire time. And it was a very bizarre experience because I was not, you know, the egoic personality self was not in control of that experience. I was not choosing, so to speak, like consciously choosing, I'm going to move this way now and I'm going to turn over. It was like I was witnessing a force moving me through this entire experience. And what was really interesting was my ego, or the ego mind, was present, but it was like all the way over there, and it was like narrating occasionally. It was so quiet in the background. It was like witnessing me going through, you know, the light language and channeling all of this stuff. And it was like, this is so weird. This is not normal. What's happening? We need to wake up now, or whatever, you know, like we need to try and stop this experience. And when I was channeling, it was like I had to use so much personal will to be able to communicate as Natasha, as the ego personality, to my ex-boyfriend, so that I could tell him, like, I need the toilet or I need more tissue, because I literally couldn't move myself, and I couldn't cultivate enough personal egoic will as the individual to move myself to do what I needed to do. I needed assistance. So I almost had to interrupt the flow of the channeling to tell him what I needed, but that took so much effort because it was just ripping through me. And then there was one experience towards the end where I kind of like laid down in the sign of the cross, and like, oh, it was a really strange, bizarre series of things that I still don't understand what happened. And this entire time this was happening, my head was throbbing, my body was really going through like this intense physical purging, which of course was all part of this process. And in all honesty, I do not remember it ending. I think I must have passed out. I don't remember it ending. So that was the bulk of the experience. And I mean, that sounds fairly tame when I recall it, but it wasn't a tame experience. Most of that time I was screaming, howling, shaking, trembling, channeling. And I was also for the entirety of the experience, I was very much in the body, in that I hadn't, I wasn't astral traveling. I hadn't left the body and I wasn't observing it from another vantage point. I was very much able to look out of my eyes and see my body and see my ex sat on the chair, and I was able to witness all of it, but it was a completely impersonal experience. I'd lost any sense that this was my body. I was just witnessing it all. I was just observing all of it. There was no judgment, no aversion, no attachment. And as I say, my ego mind was in the background the entire time, occasionally piping up saying like, this is so fucking weird. But it was so faint and in the background, and this observer witnessing presence was so prominent that, yeah, the individual ego will was not something I could muster. I was just in that space of surrender, and I let the Kundalini do her work with me. And so that, in a nutshell, is the bulk of my kind of acute Kundalini awakening experience. What proceeded to happen in the kind of days that followed was I was exhausted. I was confused. I was not terrified in the sense that I didn't, for one moment, I didn't think that was a malevolent experience. It sat, because I could feel that I was in witnessing presence, and I could feel that, I could feel the presence of God. I really could feel the presence of God. I knew that I was being moved through a very intense somatic releasing experience, and I trusted that innately. But what proceeded to happen was kind of being terrified of just the light language, and, you know, my human mind could not understand what I'd seen in the images I'd seen and the lives that I'd re-experienced. It just blew my mind. I didn't understand what happened. So there was fear in that. I had to I took 4 days off of the course. I could barely move in that 4 days. I was just spent, which meant that because it was an intensive yoga teacher training course, I couldn't complete the course. And so when I eventually had enough energy to go in and meet with the teachers and talk to them, I tried to explain sort of what had happened, and I tried to explain to my classmates what had happened, but I didn't have any language to describe what had happened. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't understand. And no one on the course suggested or even mentioned the word Kundalini. So I don't think it wasn't in anyone's kind of consciousness to even consider that it might have been that. And even if someone had said to me, oh, I think you've had a Kundalini awakening, I wouldn't have known what that really meant or what the implications of that were. That's how under-equipped I was to deal with this experience. So I ended up not finishing my course. They very kindly refunded me the remaining weeks that I hadn't completed. And slowly, I then went through the rest of my trip as planned with my ex. We were there until December, so we, carried on going through slowly but surely some nice restorative experiences, just beach time and whatnot, so I could recover. And then there was a series of lots of other things happened on that trip, which really blasted my consciousness open even more. But because I hadn't understood what happened to me before, had I known, I probably would have been more careful with those experiences. And I'll speak about those in another video. But essentially, I went through a Kriya Yoga initiation, and I went to the Isha Center in Coimbatore, so Sadhguru's center, where he has infused, if you're not aware, he's infused I think it's a piece of granite, a piece of stone with his consciousness that you can visit, so that when he's not there, you can still experience his level of consciousness. I visited that center multiple times, and the Kundalini went absolutely wild while I was there, and I didn't know what was going on. So, yes, that is my experience in a nutshell. One thing I do want to mention, actually, is that now I think about it, and it's something that I've only made the link to recently, actually, is that I believe I started to experience Kundalini awakening symptoms, or perhaps an indication that she was beginning to awaken, as early as 2017. And I believe that actually my Kundalini only awakened because I met who I believe to be my twin flame. So towards the end of 2017, I started presenting with what I thought was neurological dysfunction. So I was experiencing random body tremors, muscle twitches, often the same kind of things that I experience now when the Kundalini is working through me. And I'm going through that now, actually. It's just, I can feel in my system, there's like a lot of activation present. And so I started to experience these random, this sense of disorientation. I would get this feeling like I was drunk. This was in 2017, to the point where I was working and I had to take 2 months off work because I was experiencing really acute pain in my back. Out of nowhere, I was experiencing acute back pain. I was experiencing these random drunken, disorientating headache-like experiences where it kind of felt like I was not in my body, like I was floating. Again, similar to what I experienced on the other side of the Kundalini awakening. I often will, not as often now, but I will get these experiences where I feel drunk when the Kundalini is really working through me, especially if I'm resisting it. What else was I experiencing? Yeah, just what I had self-diagnosed as neurological dysfunction. I'd gone through MRIs and all these different scans and tests. They couldn't find anything wrong with me, but it was becoming so debilitating, like I couldn't drive properly because I was having these weird disorientating experiences, that I then went and sought out a chiropractor. And that is how I met my twin flame. And the rest is history. So, yeah, it was an experience that I would deem to be quite traumatic, in that it, even as someone that had had some degree of understanding of a broad and naive understanding of spirituality and the non-physical And obviously I'd been interested in yoga, so I had a degree. My foundation in my journey had been mindfulness and meditation. So I had an understanding of these concepts and how they support the cultivation of awareness, of loving presence. I was still so under-equipped to deal with that Kundalini awakening experience. And, 33 minutes. So not so bad. I thought this was going to be hours and hours, but it's not so bad. And so perhaps I should just explain what proceeded to happen in the wake of that experience. So as I mentioned, I had some pretty profound experiences while I was still in India that I think further provoked the Kundalini. And I'm going to do a separate video on my experience of the Isha Foundation Center, because I would like to share that publicly, because I don't feel that the center handled that experience very well that I'd gone through, especially given the nature of the center, that it's, and all the work that Sadhguru does. This is a man with what could be considered an enlightened consciousness, and he's created a space to support the awakening and enlightenment of others, and yet when someone goes there and has these profound experiences, they seemed completely under-equipped or ill-equipped, or not even interested in dealing with it, basically. So I'll make a separate video about that. But what proceeded to happen in 2020 was for most of the year, thought I was going through a psychotic episode. I honestly felt like I was losing my mind. And I look back now, the fact that I've made it to November 2022 and I'm still here, and I still have some degree of sanity, and I'm still in a body breathing, is miraculous to me, because I was 2020 was awful, and it was awful for a lot of people, right? We had obviously the pandemic that emerged at the beginning of 2020, and actually when I was in India, I kept saying to my ex-partner, we were planning to move to Bristol in 2020, which we did attempt to do, and it didn't work out because all the COVID stuff emerged. But I kept saying to my ex, we're gonna try and move to Bristol, and something's going to stop us, because I could feel something in my consciousness was brewing big for 2020, and I didn't know what it was, but I kept saying to him, something big is coming, I can feel it, and it's gonna catch us all off guard. And then COVID hit. So that whole year of 2020 was disruptive for us all as a collective anyway. At an individual level, there was all of that, and there was the fact that I was, a couple of months post Kundalini awakening, back in the UK, regularly, frequently, and involuntarily channeling light language. No idea what was going on. No idea I'd had a Kundalini awakening. At that point, I don't even think I was on social media of any kind. So I didn't even have awakening community that I could tap into. I had like a couple of friends that were interested in meditation, mindfulness, yoga, but I didn't have anyone around me that was dealing with more of the cosmic elements that I was starting to experience. I started to, when I would go into these involuntary, what I call trance states, because it doesn't happen as often now, but when I was channeling, particularly for that first year after the Kundalini awakening, when I was channeling my light language, I would go into trance. So my eyes would roll back, I would literally get zapped up my crown, and I would get blasted out of my body, and I would start to experience all kinds of stuff in the multiverse. And that included beginning to see non-human forms, we could say, or cosmic beings. So that was also the time when I started to get regularly contacted by members of the Lyran race. So Lyrans are a type of galactic race, very high vibrational. I think there are multiple different kind of lineages. I was experiencing the actual lion-faced individuals. I was also experiencing contact with Pleiadian and avian beings, avians being kind of blue bird beings. And again, I had no context for any of this. I hadn't sought out, so I didn't even know the word starseed. I didn't know the word light language. I didn't have any vocabulary to describe what was going on. I was going into these states involuntarily. I had so much resistance. I kept asking it to stop because I would go and I could feel that they wanted to contact me. And I was like, I don't know who you are and I don't know what this is about, but I don't want it. I don't want any of this. And I was in complete denial, basically, for all of 2020. I was in complete denial. And I was just so at odds with the fact that I'd gone through this experience and that it had blasted me open to being a channel, and I had no support for that process whatsoever, and I resented it. I resented it. And I will say that, although it's 3 years later, I am still... I still struggle with shame around channeling, around sharing light language, around the fact that I know tangibly, viscerally, without a doubt in my own consciousness that we live in a multidimensional reality where we are not the only beings present on Earth, nor are we the only beings present in this cosmic experience. And I've had so many experiences since that Kundalini awakening explosion that have forced me to shift paradigms in such a radical way. Because this is the thing, when you have experiences, you know, and bearing in mind I've had quite a lot of out there experiences since my kind of initial awakening in 2016, when you have enough of those experiences back to back to back to back to back, your conditioning gets worn down to such a degree that you have no other choice but to be open to the possibility that a different way or a different paradigm is possible. And that's what the Kundalini awakening has done to me in a very, what felt like a very kind of unceremonious way. She forced me to kind of abandon any and all ideas I had about myself and my role in this life and my ideas about the physical world and my identity. I've gone through just such a, as everyone does who has this experience in their own way, I've gone through such an intense period of death, disillusion, rebirth, and then that process over and over and over and over again. So I would say that post Kundalini awakening, three years post Kundalini awakening now, I finally got to a place now where I have not got enough personal will left to try and exercise my idea of what life should look like over that of the divines. So I would say that fairly recently I've finally begun to realize that I, the ego personality of Natasha, is not in charge. And I went into a trance state earlier this year after another big Kundalini explosion, where I started to channel and then I went into trance, and I was told very, very clearly that I was not taking the path of the Kundalini seriously, that I had actually, that it was a responsibility and a gift, and that I wasn't taking it seriously, and that I was treating it as like a hobby, as like something that, I'll just tap into it and, you know, play around with it when I feel like it. And not recognizing that this is the path of purification, and it's exactly what I'd asked for. I asked to be awakened when I first started on my journey. I asked to remember truth. I asked to connect with my soul and to connect to the divine. I got what I asked for, which is ultimately what the Kundalini is doing for us. She's returning us to truth. But to the human, it feels brutal and traumatic and unsettling and destabilizing and everything else in between. And I think I will probably do another video or another couple of videos. If this is of interest, please comment below. I will probably do another couple of videos explaining, you know, what it's like living with the Kundalini, being active in this way, ways that I've found that have been helpful and effective at moving the energy. What I will say in this video is that if you've been through a Kundalini awakening, spontaneous or otherwise, resistance is futile. And we don't want to hear that. When the ego is digging its heels in and saying like, no, like, I don't want this, I didn't ask for this, this is not the way that it was supposed to be, and you are coming up against the tsunami-like force that is the Kundalini, you are always going to lose. The ego is never going to be able to withstand the force of life, like the divine force of life that is the Kundalini. And you can try, but the harder you try to resist, which I've done, believe me, the more she will obliterate your idea of you. And so what I would say to anyone that's been through this process or is going through this process is, once the Kundalini is truly awake within us, once God has woken up within us, our life is no longer our own. And to the ego, that sounds damning and almost torturous. But actually, it's the seat of liberation to recognize that it was never really supposed to be about us anyway, us, the ego personality. We were always here to be conduits for the divine. And the Kundalini is the process of purifying us so that we can be emptied out of those ideas of us and our lives. And we can then be clear channels for this energy to move through us, live as us, to serve the highest and best good. That is by no means an easy process, to lay down your egoic ideas and agendas and conditioning. It's by no means an easy process, so please go easy on yourself. But what I would say is, in my embodied experience working with this energy now, we have to kind of abandon all ideas of what we should be doing, how we should be moving through the world. And I've only recently just got to the point where I've literally held my hands up and I've said, I have tried exercising personal will. I tried moving to that place. I tried doing this thing. I tried starting a business in this way. I tried forcing life. And every single time I tried, everything that I tried to force to happen dissolved. I had a tower moment. It dissolved, or it was destroyed in some form or another. And so I've got to a point recently where I'm recognizing that the Kundalini she's only ever asking me to honor what's emerging within my present moment experience. That's it. And because the Kundalini is purifying us of our fear-based conditioning and our trauma, what she's going to ask us to bear witness to and to acknowledge and to express is not always easy. Yesterday, for example, I moved through such deep rage, and I had like a full-on, and I let myself just feel it and express it, and it can actually be really scary to be with ourselves when we are expressing in ways that don't feel normal or safe to us. I was punching and I was screaming and I was howling, and it had to be released, because that was the expression that wanted to move through me. And that was the emotion attached to a lot of the stories that I'm unraveling at the moment. And so when we try and deny the expression that wants to move through us, it's like a pressure cooker. So that's my big kind of suggestion for anyone else moving through this experience. Please do your best to find spaces and create spaces for yourself where you can feel safe enough to express and where you can allow this energy to move. Find communities where you are not alone, where this process is understood, and know that this is actually happening for your highest and best good, but it will require you to it will require you to bury any and all ideas you've had about your life so that you can be a true channel for the divine to work through. So I'm going to end that here, I think. I think that was a fairly succinct experience of my Kundalini awakening. I can feel her. I can feel her now moving through me. And when I had this trance channeling state earlier, I was told very clearly that I need to speak about my experience and that I need to stop hiding hiding who I am and what wants to move through me. My light language, you know, my ideas, my general expression embodiment. Basically, I need to show up in the world as me, authentically, instead of these kind of watered down, diluted versions of me. That's what the Kundalini instructed me earlier this year. And she also told me very, very, very explicitly that I need to share this story because lots of other people are going through this experience. And, you know, there are probably thousands of not testimonials, 5 stars. All in all, great experience meeting the divine. No, but there are lots of other, I guess, testimonials, people sharing their experience of a Kundalini awakening on the internet. But the more of us that actually share our experiences, the more that those who go through these experiences can find support, right? So I'm just another person sharing my experience in the hope that it, I don't know, makes one person who watched this feel a little bit less crazy, because you will, unless you've got tremendous amounts of support and understanding and you've prepared for this experience, you probably will feel like an absolutely insane person. And that's part of the process. And so it's having the tools, the community in place so that you can move through that, because that's normal. The very idea of who you are and what life is about, and every paradigm that you've held very firmly in place, is dissolved during this process. It does feel destabilizing. That's kind of the point. So be kind with yourself if you're experiencing this. You're not alone. And I will probably go on to make more videos about various aspects of the Kundalini awakening journey. But I would love to hear in the comments your thoughts about that, your direct experiences, any questions you've had, and if I feel comfortable or confident to, I will create a response. I think the last thing probably to touch on, which is something I'm going to speak to more fully in another video, is the fear around the Kundalini, because I grew up Catholic. I grew up in being exposed to a lot of religious conditioning. I had a lot of fear of the darkness. And so, understandably, especially because, you know, that this religious conditioning we've been exposed to, it's individual, it's collective, this fear of the feminine, this fear of the darkness and the feminine, they're synonymous, has been collectively instilled in our consciousness. So if you go through this experience, there can be all sorts of worry, you know, am I being possessed? Is this demonic? Blah, 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 blah. And they may be legitimate concerns. But what I'm going to say is trust your innate guidance, trust your innate wisdom on this. I will create another video about an experience I had earlier this year where I was told that I was harboring a demon and that I was serving the darkness by someone that was very close to me. And it was awful. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible experience. But what I've come to realize, having gone through that, and I went through all the fucking karma around that, and I saw clearly what was actually being exposed, which was my fear of darkness and their fear of the darkness. What I will say is that you are being exposed to that which you need to see, feel, and heal. Now, I have experienced external, what you could call demonic entities in my physical reality, and it isn't fun. But what I will say is, everything, regardless of whether you label it light, dark, good, bad, you know, whatever, evil, angelic, however you describe these experiences, everything is being asked to be held in love. And love is the only force great enough to hold all of these experiences and to meet those experiences that can feel really scary and dark. And so do as much as you can to anchor yourself in faith, in love, in connection to the divine. Create that as your intention, and you will not go far wrong. And use and trust your innate body wisdom. Your body will know intuitively whether something feels genuinely malevolent, it doesn't feel good, so to speak, or whether there is a benevolent presence in your experience that is just unfortunately quite destabilizing for your ego. Your body knows, your heart knows. So go within always. Ask your heart and know that regardless of what you're facing, love is the greatest force you have access to, and you always have access to it because you are love. So I would encourage you to make love your place of orientation, and you will be aligned with God when you're aligned with love. So I'm going to end that here, sending you so much love. Thank you for, if you've stayed this long, thank you for staying and witnessing me and hearing me, being quite vulnerable. I thought I would cry during this sharing, but I didn't, so that's good progress. Thank you for witnessing me, and yeah, I look forward to hearing what you have to say. If you've got any comments or questions, please leave them in the comment section below. If you're not already subscribed and you'd like to hear more wild and wacky experiences like this, there are a lot, feel free to subscribe. Also, liking and sharing this video really helps the algorithm pick up my channel. So thank you for being here, sending you lots and lots of love and gratitude, and I look forward to connecting with you again really soon.